Hare Krishna, devotees. Welcome to day 27 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam. We are it is the 27th day of the second canto. We're in chapter 9, which is second to last chapter in the second canto. And we're starting on with verse 7. So first of all, some prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschitya Deshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakapatarubhyas Cha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. All right, so here we go. And the chapter title is Answers by Citing the Lord's Version. And the section we're in, which is the second one, is titled Shukadev Describes Brahma's Experience and Realization, and it's verse 4 to verse 8. And and we're starting with verse 7. Here we are. And here's the translation. When he heard the sound, this is Brahma, when Brahma, heard the sound of tapa, he tried to find the speaker, searching on all sides, but when he was unable to find anyone besides himself, he thought it wise to sit down on his lotus seat firmly and give his attention to the execution of penance, as he was instructed. Right. So if you remember, he had climbed down the lotus stem to some degree. And then he heard these two syllables, together, tapa. Yeah. Yes, okay, so Srila Prabhupada discusses that if we want to be successful in life, we should follow Brahma's example, and then his procedure is described. He got initiated, and then he was fixed in his determination like this, and he basically did what he was told. Yeah, so interesting point Prabhupada makes in the middle of the first paragraph, that in Srimad Bhagavatam 1:1:1, the very first verse, it says he was initiated from within. Tene Brahma Hrida, Hrida meaning the heart, by the Lord. So, and the thing is, the Lord is within all, and Brahma was initiated in that way because Brahma was willing to be initiated. And the Lord, Prabhupada says, can similarly initiate everyone who's inclined to have it. Then the second paragraph, and Srila Prabhupada explains the system of transmission of the Bhagavatam means disciplic succession, of course. And that's the normal way to receive it. And, although Prabhupada just said, we just read a minute ago, that the Lord can initiate everyone who's inclined to have it, in other words, from within. But Prabhupada then makes the point, and it's really, we really got to bear this in mind, that we are not on the level of Brahma to be initiated from within. No, we have to be initiated in the normal way through disciplic succession. So, but otherwise, the Lord appears as the spiritual master. Yes. Yes. We know of the spiritual master within and the spiritual master without. Chaita Guru, the spiritual master within, is the Lord within the heart. But then there's the spiritual master without, means the you could say regular spiritual masters as we're familiar with in ISKCON and in the tradition in general. So we can take that the Lord's appearing to us as the spiritual master without, and he does that. He manifests to people through the spiritual master, people who are sincere at heart about devotional service. And therefore, such a spiritual master, the regular spiritual master, should be accepted as confidential representative of the Lord. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, if a person is posted under the guidance of such a bona fide spiritual master, it may be accepted without any doubt that the desiring person has achieved the grace of the Lord. That is really, isn't it? That's quite a statement. So, verse 8, Lord Brahma underwent penances for 1,000 years by the calculations of the demigods. He heard this transcendental vibration from the sky, and he accepted it as divine. Thus he controlled his mind and senses, and the penances he executed were a great lesson for the living entities. Thus he is known as the greatest of all ascetics. So, Prabhupada explains in the purport that Brahma heard what Prabhupada calls the occult sound, means mystical sound, tapa. He didn't know who vibrated it, but still he accepted it as beneficial, and therefore engaged himself like that in meditation for 1,000 celestial years. And Prabhupada gives a calculation that 1 celestial year is equal to 6 times 30 times 12 times 1,000 of our years. Yes. So his acceptance of the sound was due to his pure vision. He was a very purified soul already. So he had a pure vision of the absolute nature of the Lord. Therefore he made no distinction between the Lord and his instructions. And we can take it like that, even if the Lord is not personally present, but he's there in his instructions, in his holy names also. Here we're talking particularly about his instructions. So the best thing, if we want to develop our real understanding, is to accept such divine instructions, Prabhupada says. And Lord Brahma is the prime example of this. And interesting point, the potency of such sound is never minimized because the speaker's not present. One person from another Gaudiya institution complained about Srila Prabhupada giving Gayatri mantras to devotees at the time of second initiation via, at that time, tape recordings. And the person was insisting that the spiritual master has to personally give the mantras from his lips face to face. But Prabhupada is making it clear here that the sound is never minimized due to some factor like that. So Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, therefore Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita or any revealed scripture in the world is never to be accepted as an ordinary mundane sound without transcendental potency. No, they have the potency. But the thing is, in the second paragraph, you have to receive that sound from the right source and then accept it and prosecute the directions, Prabhupada says, without hesitation. So the real secret then, Prabhupada emphasizes, is to get it from the right source, the bona fide spiritual master. Otherwise, mundane sound has no potency, and seemingly transcendental sound from the wrong source also has no potency. But otherwise, if we receive it in the right way from the right source, qualified person, then Prabhupada says one's path to liberation is guaranteed. Of course, having heard it, that's the start. But then Prabhupada explains that the disciple has to be ready to execute the order that is given. As Brahma did. So we hear the sound from the right source, then we have to execute the order which was transmitted in the sound. And Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, following the order of the bona fide spiritual master is the only duty of the disciple, and this completely faithful execution of the order of the bona fide spiritual master is the secret of success. And then there's a third paragraph, and Srila Prabhupada begins the paragraph by saying, Lord Brahma controlled his 2 grades of senses by means of sense perception and sense organs, because he had to engage such senses in the execution of the order of the Lord. His perceiving senses and the actual organs, they're considered 2 grades or types of senses. So controlling the senses means to engage them in the service of the Lord under the direction of the bona fide spiritual master, or under the direction of the Lord if you're in that position like Brahma, but generally it means under the direction of the spiritual master. So the Lord's orders in general are coming through disciplic succession, through the spiritual master. So therefore executing the order of the spiritual master is factual control of the senses, what Prabhupada's been talking about in this paragraph. And that execution of penance in full faith made Brahma so powerful that he became the creator of the universe. Therefore he's called the best of the tapasvis. And therefore for us, if we accept those orders and execute them in the same spirit that Lord Brahma did, then we'll also, he became powerful to create. It's, who knows what potency Krishna will give us if we do like that. But he'll definitely give us real potency, particularly to carry out those orders that we've received. So now we come to the third section, which is from verse 9 to verse 19, which we've titled, "The Lord Reveals Vaikuntha to Brahma." Let us read the verses. The personality of Godhead being thus very much satisfied with the penance of Lord Brahma, was pleased to manifest his personal abode Vaikuntha, the supreme planet above all others. This transcendental abode of the Lord is adored by all self-realized persons, freed from all kinds of miseries and fear of illusory existence. Verse 10, in that personal abode of the Lord, the material modes of ignorance and passion do not prevail, nor is there any of their influence in goodness. There is no predominance of the influence of time. So what to speak of the illusory external energy? It cannot enter that region. Without discrimination, both the demigods and the demons worship the Lord as devotees. And verse 11, the inhabitants of the Vaikuntha planets are described as having a glowing, sky-bluish complexion. Their eyes resemble lotus flowers. Their dress is of yellowish color, and their bodily features very attractive. They're just the age of growing youths. They all have 4 hands. They're all nicely decorated with pearl necklaces with ornamental medallions, and they all appear to be effulgent. Verse 12, some of them are effulgent like coral and diamonds in complexion, and have garlands on their heads, blooming like lotus flowers, and some wear earrings. 13, the Vaikuntha planets are also surrounded by various airplanes, all glowing and brilliantly situated. These airplanes belong to the great Mahatmas, or devotees of the Lord. The ladies are as beautiful as lightning because of their celestial complexions, and all these combined together appear just like the sky, decorated with both clouds and lightning. 14. The goddess of fortune, the goddess of fortune in her transcendental form is engaged in the loving service of the Lord's lotus feet. And being moved by the black bees, followers of spring, she is not only engaged in variegated pleasure, service to the Lord along with her constant companions, but is also engaged in singing the glories of the Lord's activities. 15. Lord Brahma saw in the Vaikuntha planets the personality of Godhead, who is the Lord of the entire devotee community, the Lord of the goddess of fortune, the Lord of all sacrifices, and the Lord of the universe, and who is served by the foremost servitors like Nanda, Sunanda, Prabala, and Arhana, his immediate associates. 16. The personality of Godhead, seen leaning favorably toward his loving servitors, his very sight intoxicating and attractive, appeared to be very much satisfied. He had a smiling face decorated with an enchanting reddish hue. He was dressed in yellow robes and wore earrings and a helmet on his head. He had 4 hands, and his chest was marked with the lines of the goddess of fortune. 17. The Lord was seated on his throne and was surrounded by different energies like the 4, the 16, the 5, and the 6 natural opulences, along with other insignificant energies of the temporary character. But he was the factual Supreme Lord, enjoying his own abode. And 18, Lord Brahma thus seeing the personality of Godhead in his fullness, was overwhelmed with joy within his heart, and thus in full transcendental love and ecstasy, his eyes filled with tears of love. He thus bowed down before the Lord. That is the way of the highest perfection for the living being, Paramahansa. And 19. And seeing Brahma present before him, the Lord accepted him as worthy to create living beings, to be controlled as he desired, as the Lord desired. And thus being much satisfied with him, the Lord shook hands with Brahma and, slightly smiling, addressed him thus. Okay. So, devotees, let's go back through this whole section, including the purports. Verse 9. So the title again. The Lord reveals Vaikuntha to Brahma. Verse 9. The personality of Godhead, being thus very much satisfied with the penance of Lord Brahma, was pleased to manifest his personal abode Vaikuntha, the supreme planet above all others. This transcendental abode of the Lord is adored by all self-realized persons, freed from all kinds of miseries and fear of illusory existence. Right, so Lord Brahma's penance and the whatever difficulties he faced in his penances was all in the line of devotional service. Otherwise, if he wasn't a devotee and if he wasn't absorbed in devotional service, there's no chance of him seeing Vaikuntha. Yes, it's neither mystical, like subtle material, or just ordinary material as the impersonalists think. So it's achieved only by devotional service, so only devotees can enter. And Prabhupada makes the point, the verse says, the troubles of tapasya. Yes, there's always, in some tapasya, there's always some trouble. But when we accept some difficulty for the service of the Lord, then it's all transcendental happiness from beginning to end. But otherwise, Prabhupada explains penance in any other process, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, or like that, which do not lead to Vaikuntha realization, then those penances are not happiness, but they are trouble only. So Srila Prabhupada states that there's, at the end of the paragraph, there's no profit in beating husks without grains. Similarly, there's no profit in executing troublesome penances other than bhakti yoga for self-realization. And the second paragraph, Prabhupada makes an interesting point, that when we do bhakti yoga, it's exactly like sitting on the lotus seat of Lord Brahma. In effect, we're doing the same thing. And by doing that, Brahma pleased the Lord showed him his abode, and the same will happen to us. Prabhupada refers to Srila Jiva Goswami, who says in his comments of his Krama Sandarbha annotation of Srimad Bhagavatam, cites quotations from the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad, which is Vedic evidence. It is said that Yajnavalkya described the transcendental abode of the Lord to Gargi, and that the abode of the Lord is situated above the highest planet of the universe, namely Brahmaloka. So in other words, the Lord's abode is not a myth for less intelligent people. So Therefore, the word in the verse, swadrishtvad be, is very significant. It means by those who have perfectly realized the self. It's in the last line of the Sanskrit of the verse itself. So one, Prabhupada goes on, one who's really realized the self, his self, in reality, obviously realizes the form of himself or herself. And therefore impersonal realization of self is incomplete because it's impersonal and there's no form in it. Because impersonal realization, it's just, or the whole impersonal idea, it's simply the opposite of material existence. Yeah. And the Lord and the devotees are transcendental. They don't have material bodies. So anyway, these material bodies, which we have, and in general, there are 5 kinds of miserable conditions. This is interesting and important. 5 kinds of miserable conditions: ignorance, material conception, attachment, and number 4, hatred, number 5, absorption. So as long as one has these, there's no question of entering Vaikuntha Loka. And like we already mentioned, the impersonal conception is just a negation. That in material life there are forms, so impersonal realization means no forms. Material life means personalities. Impersonal realization means no personalities. So in this way, it's composed of simply negatives, and is far from the positive existence of personalism, of personal form. And Lord Brahma also described that the highest planet in Vaikuntha Loka is Goloka Vrindavan, where the Lord's a cowherd, with cows and thousands of goddesses of fortune. That's Brahma Samhita chapter 5, verse 29. So, well, Prabhupada quotes that 529 here in the purport, and then Prabhupada refers to Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, verse 6. Yad gatvana vartante tad dhamma paramam mama. That param means transcendental Brahman. Therefore, the abode of the Lord is also Brahman, non-different from the Lord. Yes, tad dhamma paramam mama. It's the param dham. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Lord is known as Vaikuntha, and his abode is also known as Vaikuntha. Such Vaikuntha realization and worship can be made possible by transcendental form and sense. So, verse 10, in that personal abode of the Lord, the material modes of ignorance and passion do not prevail, nor is there any of their influence in goodness. There is no predominance of the influence of time. So what to speak of the illusory external energy? It cannot enter that region. That means the illusory external energy cannot enter that region. Without discrimination, both the demigods and the demons worship the Lord as devotees. Okay, so Srila Prabhupada, now it's maybe not the first time he's introduced this idea, but it's one of the earlier times at least, that the kingdom of God, the Vaikuntha region, is called Tripad Vibhuti, means three parts of the energy, of the manifestation, which has four parts. This material world, it's not mentioned exactly here, but it's generally called Ekapad Vibhuti, one part. And it's not precise that the spiritual world is 3 times bigger than the material world, because the spiritual world is unlimited. It's infinite. And if you divide infinity by anything, including by infinity, you're left with infinity. But just to give us a perspective, yes, the Vaikuntha realm is much bigger, at least 3 times bigger than the material universes. And it's now going to be described in a nutshell, as it's also described in Bhagavad Gita in a nutshell. So Prabhupada explains then, this universe is one of billions of universes within the Mahatattva. All of them together are just 1/4 of the creation of the Lord. You know, as we said, just to give us an idea of perspective. So even the leaves of a tree are hard to count, or the hairs on our head. How many hairs do I have in my seeker, or on my head, or on my face? I just shaved this morning. I mean, who knows, really? But still, fools talk of becoming God, although they can't count the hairs on their heads. You know, there's a place, it's in the 10th canto, the prayers of Lord Brahma, chapter 13. And Brahma says that the Lord has so many qualities. It's more than the grains of sand on a beach, more than the stars in the sky, and more than the number of atoms in the universe. And so I think it's Sanatana Goswami, but one of our acharyas makes the point that the Supreme Personality of Godhead knows how many atoms there are in this universe. We don't even know how many hairs are on our heads. Yes. Right, so how could we be God? It's literally crazy for people to say that they're God or they're going to become God. And Prabhupada makes an interesting and very important point, that even if man does go to the moon, he can't stay there. Because now it's become the whole idea of going to the moon, and even Mars has really come up again in society. But you know, even if they do go to some of these places, or one of them, how are they going to stay there? And how will they stay there anyway? Yeah. So therefore, sane people, the sane man, therefore, without being puffed up, as if he were the God of the universe, abides by the instructions of the Vedic literature, the easiest way to acquire knowledge in transcendence. And so we can know whatever we need to know about these things, like the universe and the planets and all that. We can find out through the Bhagavatam. But, interesting point made here, and Prabhupada reflects on it. In the spiritual sky, there are no modes of passion and ignorance. And Prabhupada gives an explanation. The mode of ignorance influences the living entity to the habit of lust and hankering. But in Vaikuntha, these things are absent. Yes. And in the Brahma Bhuta stage, one becomes free of hankering and lamentation. So in Vaikuntha, they're all Brahma Bhuta. And when you're in passion or ignorance, you may be in goodness. But that is also, at least within this world, that's also contaminated by touches of the modes of passion and ignorance. But in Vaikuntha, there is unalloyed goodness only, means pure spiritual goodness. So, okay, the second paragraph. I mean, this is an extensive purport. So the whole situation in Vaikuntha is freedom from illusion, from the illusory manifestation of the external energy, which that external energy is part and parcel of the Lord, but it's also differentiated from the Lord. It's separated, as he says in Bhagavad Gita, separated energy. But it's not false, it's just misleading, that's all. And Prabhupada gives famous example of thinking that a rope is a snake. Yes. So that there are ropes, there are snakes. Yeah. But you can make the mistake of thinking that what is actually a rope, you may think it's a snake. And Prabhupada gives another example. When you're in the desert, you know, this classic situation, someone's lost in the desert and it's just blazing hot. And they're so totally overwhelmed with thirst. They start hallucinating, so they see a mirage of water. So there's no water there, it's a mirage, it's an hallucination. But certainly water is real, and there is water somewhere, but not in the hallucination. Yeah, and the desert is real, of course, too. So the material creation, therefore, is illusion for the non-devotees. Just bewilders them to think that, yes, life is good, I can do this, I can do that, I can be happy and successful. It's all just a big illusion, concluding with death, which is like total failure. But for the devotees, it's a manifestation of the Lord's external energy, and therefore the devotees try to engage material things in his service. Yeah, and this external energy, of course, is not all in all. He has an internal energy, and that is Vaikuntha, where there are no three modes and no past or present. So if you have a poor fund of knowledge, you can't understand Vaikuntha, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So, okay, there's a third paragraph, and there's a fourth one too coming up. Srila Jiva Goswami, Prabhupada refers to, he tells us that Vaikuntha is enriched with transcendental qualities distinct from the modes. Yes. And they're not attainable by non-devotees. There is a marginal line, Prabhupada says, between the material world and spiritual world. That's the Viraja river, which is a transcendental current flowing from the perspiration of the Lord's body. And one literature named Sankhya Kaumudi says that the transcendental is opposite to the modes. That, well, let me just read what it says. That there in that Sankhya Kaumudi it is stated that unalloyed goodness or transcendence is just opposite to the material modes. Everyone there in the spiritual world is eternally associated without any break. The members are free to go everywhere within the creation of the Lord. No limit to it. And there's no history of such association, nor is there end of it. Yes, so it's really another world, so to speak, but really another world. And there the Lord is the chief and prime entity. Right, so on to the fourth paragraph. So a conclusion can be drawn from all of this, that because of the absence of the modes, there's no question of creation or annihilation. That's a conclusion we can draw. Here, everything in this world, everything's created and then annihilated. Everything's temporary, including the whole material world. But the spiritual world is eternal, and everything within it is eternal, including us. Ultimately. So everything's everlasting, full of knowledge and bliss, without deterioration. So in that sense, there's no past, present, or future in the estimation of time, which is an interesting point. The main idea is that time there is just a background for the past times. So sometimes the day becomes longer or shorter, and the night becomes longer or shorter, just to facilitate the past times. And there's particularly no past, present, or future in the sense like the material world, where time is always deteriorating things. So, Prabhupada goes on, there are no such actions and reactions of cause and effect. So the cycle of the 6 stages of material life doesn't exist. And those 6 stages are, Prabhupada lists them out: birth, growth, existence, transformations, deterioration, and annihilation. And of course, everyone there is a devotee. In other words, where we read that the demons are engaged in devotional service, then, anyway, that was earlier. Then it doesn't mean, the demons who hate Krishna and would like to kill him, but it means people there are in different spirits, different moods in their services to the Lord. Yes. Verse 11, the inhabitants of the Vaikuntha planets are described as having a glowing sky bluish complexion. Their eyes resemble lotus flowers, their dress is of yellowish color, and their bodily features very attractive. They're just the age of growing youths, and they all have 4 hands. They're all nicely decorated with pearl necklaces, with ornamental medallions, and they all appear to be effulgent. So, yes. So, Prabhupada, there's a fairly short purport. Prabhupada explains these inhabitants of Vaikuntha have bodily features, spiritual bodily features, which are not found in the material world. As there are different bodily features in different planets or just different places, as we see. So Prabhupada says, similarly, the bodily features of the inhabitants in Vaikuntha Loka are completely different from those in the material universe. And as an example, they all have 4 hands, distinct from our 2. Verse 12, some of them are effulgent, like coral and diamonds in complexion, and have garlands on their heads, blooming like lotus flowers, and some wear earrings. So Prabhupada explains in this very short purport that some of these people have Sarupya Mukti. In Vaikuntha you get people with this. It's one of the 4 Vaishnav types of liberation, to have bodily features like those of the Lord. And Prabhupada says, the Vaidurya diamond is especially meant for the personality of Godhead. But one who achieves the liberation of bodily equality with the Lord is especially favored with such diamonds on his body. Verse 13, the Vaikuntha planets are also surrounded by various airplanes, all glowing and brilliantly situated. These airplanes belong to the great Mahatmas, or devotees of the Lord. The ladies are as beautiful as lightning because of their celestial complexions, and all these combined together appear just like the sky, decorated with both clouds and lightning. Yeah, so Prabhupada elaborates about the airplanes first of all, and the people in the airplanes. And he says, as there are airplanes, there must be other types of carriages for getting around, but they're not just machines like our airplanes. Yes, those vehicles are all Satchitananda, same quality as Brahman. And there's nothing except Brahman, nothing except spirit. And one should definitely not think mistakenly that there's only a void and no variegatedness in that Brahman existence. And there's so many people, vast numbers. There must be cities and houses, Prabhupada explains, and everything just suitable for living. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one should not carry the ideas of imperfection from this world to the transcendental world, and not take into consideration the nature of the atmosphere as completely free from the influence of time, etc., as described previously. Okay, so verse 14, the goddess of fortune in her transcendental form is engaged in the loving service of the Lord's lotus feet, and being moved by the black bees, followers of spring, she's not only engaged in variegated pleasure, service to the Lord along with her constant companions, but is also engaged in singing the glories of the Lord's activities. So there is no purport here to 14. We'll read 15. Lord Brahma saw in the Vaikuntha planets the personality of Godhead, who is the Lord of the entire devotee community, the Lord of the goddess of fortune, the Lord of all sacrifices, and the Lord of the universe, and who is served by the foremost servitors like Nanda, Sunanda, Prabala, and Arhana, his immediate associates. So, Srila Prabhupada, there's a short purport. Prabhupada makes the point that wherever there's a king, when we speak of a king, it's naturally understood there's an entourage, and the same with the Lord. All different assistants and secretaries and ministers and whatever. So, yes, so the Lord is not alone in the spiritual world. He's surrounded by so many servants, devotees, who are all engaged in different loving transcendental services to him. Yes. So what do you expect in Vaikuntha? It's like that. 16, the personality of Godhead, seen leaning favorably towards his loving servitors, his very sight intoxicating and attractive, appeared to be very much satisfied. He had a smiling face decorated with an enchanting reddish hue. He was dressed in yellow robes and wore earrings and a helmet on his head. He had 4 hands, and his chest was marked with the lines of the goddess of fortune. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada refers to Padma Purana Uttarakhanda, which gives a full description of the Yoga Pit, which means the place where the Lord is situated, in audience with his eternal devotees. And in that place, Prabhupada says, the personifications of religion, knowledge, opulence, and renunciation are all seated at the lotus feet of the Lord. Also, the 4 Vedas are there to advise the Lord personally. The 16 energies headed by Chanda are there. Chanda and Kumuda are the first 2 doorkeepers. And then at the middle door are the doorkeepers, Bhadra and Subhadra. And at the last door are Jai and Vijay. And Prabhupada says there are other doorkeepers also. Kumuda, Kumudaksha, Pundarik, Vamana, Shankukarana, Sarva Netra, Sumukha, etc. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Lord's palace is well decorated and protected by the above-mentioned doorkeepers. And verse 19, the Lord was seated on his throne and was surrounded by different energies like the 4, the 16, the 5, and the 6 natural opulences, along with other insignificant energies of the temporary character. But he was the factual Supreme Lord, enjoying his own abode. So in the purport here, Prabhupada elaborates on all these different, the 4, the 16, etc. And so let's just see what they are. First of all, the 6 opulences. He's the richest, the most powerful, the most famous, the most beautiful, the greatest in knowledge, and the greatest renouncer. These are the 6 classic opulences which he has in full. And then there are 4, and Prabhupada explains they are the 4 material creative energies, Prakriti, Purusha, Mahatattva, and ego. And then the 16 are first the 5 elements, earth, water, air, fire, and sky. Then the 5 perceptive senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, and skin. 5 working senses, the hand, the leg, the stomach, the evacuation outlet, and the genitals. And 5 sense objects, form, taste, smell, sound, and touch. I mean, these are things we've got to understand and sort of keep in our heads. What are these different, and not elements, you could say, but in terms of being parts of the picture of the senses, perceptive, working, and objects. So all these 25 serve the Lord in the material creation, but they're all personally present. Yes, to serve the Lord. The 8 insignificant opulences are the Ashtasiddhis, the 8 mystical perfections. They're under his control, but he's naturally full with all such powers with no effort. Okay, so there's a second paragraph here. So the living entity, by some severe penance, may temporarily attain some power, but it doesn't make him the Supreme Lord, like some mystical power. The Lord, by his potency, his own potency, is unlimitedly more powerful than any yogi, more learned than any jnani, richer than any rich person, more beautiful than any beautiful person, and more charitable than the greatest philanthropist, because he's the Lord. No one's equal to him, no one is greater than him. And no one can reach his level by any penances or anything. So the yogis are dependent on his mercy. He may temporarily give them some power, but to his devotees, he gives himself in exchange for their devotional service. So in that sense, the devotees have all powers at their disposal, so to speak. Right, so verse 18, Lord Brahma, thus seeing the personality of Godhead in his fullness, was overwhelmed with joy within his heart, and thus in full transcendental love and ecstasy, his eyes filled with tears of love, he thus bowed down before the Lord. That is the way of the highest perfection for the living being, the Paramahansa. So, okay, let's have a look at the purport. In the beginning of the Bhagavatam, it is said that the Bhagavatam is for the Paramahansas, those who are completely free from malice. Here in the material world, though, malice, maliciousness, starts at the top with malice towards the Lord. Amazing, isn't it? And then basically anyone else and everyone else other than those who one is controlling and getting enjoyment from. So those people in the material world don't believe in him, but they want to become God, although they lack the qualification. And this maliciousness continues to the stage where they want to become God themselves, take over. Yes, although they lack the qualification. So even the greatest material philosophers cannot become Paramahansas because of their minds. Only devotees can become Paramahansas. So it begins with faith, then simply by doing devotional service, one can come to the highest stage. And Lord Brahma did this. This is what Lord Brahma did. So you can't reach the abode of the Lord by mechanical means, only by devotional service. And therefore Brahma, sitting on his lotus seat, could actually see the Vaikunthas. So the second paragraph, so following in the footsteps of Brahma, anyone can come to the highest stage by following the path of Paramahansas as recommended here. First hear about him from Bhagavad Gita, later Bhagavatam. Hear from the person Bhagavat, not a professional. You don't have to be in the renounced order. Stay where you are, but find a devotee and hear from him. And follow those instructions. That's the way of the Paramahansas. The Lord is Ajita, unconquerable, but he can be conquered by the Paramahansa path. And therefore devotees like Mother Yashoda can order Krishna around, and he does what they say. So anyway, this is demonstrated by Lord Brahma, who has recommended this in the Bhagavatam 10:14:3, that if you just give up the path of speculation, just engage in hearing the glories of the Lord from a bona fide sadhu, live an honest life in your regular occupation, then you'll be able to conquer the devotee, get his sympathy and mercy, even though he's unconquerable. That's the path of the Paramahamsas, which Prabhupada says was personally followed by Lord Brahma and later recommended by him for attaining perfect success in life. So we are going to go on and do verse 19 and finish this section. The verse, and seeing Brahma present before him, the Lord accepted him as worthy to create living beings, to be controlled as he, the Lord, desired. And thus being much satisfied with him, the Lord shook hands with Brahma and slightly smiling addressed him thus. Isn't that amazing? Walked up to him, shook his hand. So, okay, there's a purport here. First paragraph, the creation of this world, material world, is not blind or accidental. It's to give us a chance to become liberated under the guidance of a representative of Brahma. And Lord Brahma has great responsibility to deliver the conditioned souls. Therefore, he's very dear to the Lord. And paragraph 2, he does his duty very perfectly, not just by generating, not just by creating, but by spreading his mission to reclaim the fallen souls. And this mission is the Brahma Sampradaya, and any member of it is engaged in delivering the fallen. The Lord really wants that. Yes, the Lord really wants that the members of the Brahma Sampradaya deliver the fallen. And as the Gita says, no one is more dear to him than one who tries to do this. So then a third paragraph, there are many renegades from the Brahma Sampradaya. Not people who were within it, but then they left it, but just people who are trying to avoid the Brahma Sampradaya in this world, and they want to make people more forgetful of the Lord. And they are never dear to the Lord. The Lord sends them into the darker regions of matter so that they can't know him. And then the last paragraph, Prabhupada, I'll just read the paragraph. Anyone, however, preaching the mission of the Lord in the line of the Brahma Sampradaya is always dear to the Lord. And the Lord, being satisfied with such a preacher of the authorized bhakti cult, shakes hands with him in great satisfaction. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.